Welcome to episode 2 of the Kairos Forum. I'm excited to dive into what I think might be a bit of a controversial subject today, but I think you should bear with me because I think it deserves our attention. If you have been present in the conversation in the American church any time over the last 30 years, then you know that there's a great deal of panic surrounding the decline of the American church. Now, I'm not going to get into statistics today specifically, but the Western church has been in decline over the last 50 years or so. And this has created a huge panic among church leaders, scrambling for answers and clinging deeply to anything that would mean or foster institutional survivability. It's exhausting to watch a church that is so afraid of irrelevance and so afraid of losing its influence in the world that we have created myths to help us better explain what's going on and so that we can feel a little bit better about ourselves. One of the most prevalent myths is that the decline of the church is the culture's fault, and that our culture is just so sinful and so secular that no one cares about faith or morality or family anymore. And this just simply isn't the whole truth at best and a falsehood at worst. This reasoning is harmful because it actually leads people to believe that there's a certain amount of Christian persecution in the United States. And you can feel free to disagree with me here, but let me be very clear. The notion that there is persecution of Christianity on a large scale in the United States is not only false, it is insulting to Christians who are actually facing persecution around the world. Just because your local hometown football coach isn't allowed to make his boys pray before the big game isn't persecution. It is the result of realizing that we live in a pluralistic society where multiple faiths are represented. For instance, if you had a Christian son who was on a football team with a Muslim coach and the coach made everyone kneel down and pray a prayer in the Muslim tradition, my guess is that you would feel uncomfortable with that or uncertain with it, and maybe you perhaps wouldn't even want that happening. So that's what I'm trying to say. Christian persecution isn't a real thing in the United States. Not teaching the Bible in public schools isn't Christian persecution. When Christianity is the majority religion in the United States, it cannot, by definition, be persecuted in any real way. Majorities persecute minorities. It's not the other way around. Society just doesn't work that way. I know missionaries working in parts of the world where people worship in secret for fear of their lives. And so when we disrespect that sacrifice by neglecting to acknowledge the blessing we have in the United States, it's just not right. When Christians cry out in anguish about our culture being too secular, that the church is under attack, what I believe is really happening here is a reaction to the church's dwindling influence in our culture. Christians see the church declining in number and influence, and they're afraid because they're losing their power. We're all afraid of that. But I would submit that the power we are losing is fake and shallow and devoid of the real power from God anyway. And let me explain that. In the first 3 centuries of the church, Christianity was largely illegal or heavily persecuted all throughout the Roman Empire. However, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, as the book of Acts says, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Even in the midst of martyrs and imprisonment, Christianity was growing rapidly. But why? Why in the midst of suffering did a religion like this grow? And I believe the simplest answer to this question is that Christians were different. They didn't look like the rest of the world. They were different from the rest of the dominant culture, and that's what gave them their power. They took care of the poor, they took in abandoned babies, and they challenged the authorities of their day. However, as the church grew, like all institutions, it tried to legitimize itself by aligning itself with power. And in this case, there was no greater power than the Roman Empire during that time. Eventually, the church was so successful at this that by 313 AD, Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and issued something called the Edict of Milan, which basically decriminalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire and made it the de facto religion. And so the church aligned itself with power. And I won't lie, if this didn't happen and Constantine had not been converted, you and I might not be sitting here having this conversation today. I may not be talking about Christianity at all. However, some priests and church leaders during that time saw the negative impact that heavily aligning with power had on the church. No longer did Christianity look different from society, it was society. No longer did Christianity as readily challenge the authorities because it was the authority. This was a problem. And so early church leaders called desert fathers would go out into the wilderness to escape this new reality that they found themselves in, and they really didn't know what to do about it. They considered it to be dangerous to the church. And indeed, because the church did align with power, we went on to commit many atrocities throughout those centuries. Some like the Crusades or the colonization and genocide of indigenous people. Sure, the church has done a lot of great things during that time too, but we can't escape that we have this problem with power. We still have it even today, even in the United States. In the United States, the church has put so much energy into becoming more powerful and more influential and more dominant that it's built up a tremendous amount of power in our country. But here's the problem. It's fake power. The church is declining in number in part because we have laid so much down at the altar of political and cultural dominance that we have sacrificed and paid that with our prophetic credibility. And now, people are calling us out. They are looking at us and calling us phonies. They see our power grabbing and our cultural warmongering as fake and inauthentic. So here we are, declining, and everyone is freaking out about it. And don't get me wrong, it's okay to be concerned for our church and concerned that we aren't reaching people for Christ like we should. That's okay to be concerned about. I just want to make sure that we're not upset about the wrong things. I want to make sure that we're not upset about losing our fake power. We need to be upset that we haven't had the prophetic credibility to reach a new generation. And so what does all of this mean? What does real power look like? A few years ago, I heard Tony Campolo tell this story about Mother Teresa, and it's really stuck with me even till today. There was a city council in Philadelphia who was about to remove some homeless people from the shelter that they were living in because local businesses in the area claimed that it was hindering business traffic. The council was fully prepared and expected to remove these people until Mother Teresa showed up. And she got on her hands and knees and begged them to care for the poor and begged them to reconsider. The council ended up reversing their decision at that very moment because Mother Teresa had power. She had power not because she's tall in stature or strong in words. She had power because she gave up her life. She has prophetic credibility because the holiness she lived is such a powerful testimony to us even today. Changing a city council's decision in a few minutes by begging on your hands and knees, that is power. That's not the fake stuff that we're all upset that we might be losing. That's the proper holiness power that the church should be seeking, not the facade of secular legitimization or coercive moral authority. That type of power might be tempting and might get you quick results, but only at the expense of the loss of our real power that comes from God on high. Perhaps, the church's perceived calamity and panic around losing our influence in our world is a false alarm. Perhaps God is stripping the church of our fake power so that we can get a divine glimpse of the real stuff that comes from above. Perhaps, like Jesus said, in losing our power, we might truly find it. Thank you all for joining me this week. I hope to be seeing you again next week. Please join the conversation on the comments on Facebook or on YouTube. If you disagree or you see things a little differently, that's okay. I don't want this to be a one-way conversation. Please join me in the comments. Let me know what you think. Give me your feedback so that we can have a civil discussion together. That's what the Kairos Forum is supposed to be all about. I also want to give a special shout out to my friend Katie over at Columba Collaborative for making our logo and our banner and really sprucing up our image. And so I just wanted to make sure that you all knew about her, and I'll include a link to the work that she does in the description.